morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Amar, and I'm here with my co-host. Who are you? Dude, I'll let you do all the nonsense on the other show. I don't know how you got onto this show, but I'm here with my co-host today, Nick Sigelski. Folks, we now have a couple of different co-hosts for the leadership show. Mark will be taking a series of interviews, especially where we want that CRO, that closing perspective. But Nick has actually been doing a ton of advisory work alongside me, and he also brings an awesome enterprise rep perspective to what it feels like to be on a team led by amazing leaders. And so, Nick, why don't you tell us today why people are listening?
This was a phenomenal episode with a phenomenal SDR leader. If you want to understand how to get your SDRs picking up the phone and cold calling on day 3 at your company, not necessarily selling your product, selling pizzas, believe it or not, you got to listen to this one. If you want to understand SDR team benchmarks, understanding how the sequence volume, how many people should your SDRs be putting into new sequence on a regular basis, what pickup rates should look like, what conversion rates should look like. This is great because Ken works with a lot of different SDR teams and he understands an industry as a whole, not a specific company. So if you want to benchmark, listen to this one. And if you want to understand how to get your SDRs running one-on-ones with you and bringing items rather than you driving all of those agendas, Ken's got some really great stuff.
And if you want to kill call reluctance, here's your hint. A 3, a 2, a 1, pizza time. Alrighty, Ken, welcome back to the show, but this time on the leadership show, we start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Awesome. So my first actionable takeaway is implementing a headhunting drill into your SDR workflow. So really simply, a headhunting drill is getting your SDRs, typically your newer SDRs, cold calling your executives internally. I don't care what kind of product you sell in SaaS, you're going to have a team internally that is an end user of that product. And your new SDRs are going to spend a week. I recommend a week cold calling your executives. Some might complain, hey, I don't have time to pick up SDR cold calls. Everyone's got 5 minutes in their day for cold calling, and they can look, on their calendar, see these gaps between. And these SDRs are going to cold call the executives, and they're going to pitch the product, right? And this does 2 amazing things. One, it gets your SDRs ramped really quickly with high-level executives who they will be calling with in their day-to-day. And secondly, it builds these connections between SDRs and executives, right? So eventually when they do come up for promotion, the CEO, the CRO might know the name of that SDR. And then lastly, it does build an awesome amount of political capital internally. You build a kind of awesome internal brand with both your SDRs and with your executives.
I'm going to have every member of the audience cold call Nick after this episode. Ken, what's number 2?
All right, so number 2, I call this like the law of cold calling. For every 100 dials an SDR makes, on average, they'll get about 5 to 6 connects, and they should be booking at least 1 meeting for every one of those 100 dials. So the law goes like this. Every 100 dials, you should get 1 meeting. If they're not, there's a problem either in their connects or in their conversions, right? And there's different solutions around both that.
All right, bring us home. What do we got for number 3?
All right, number 3. So this is a bit of a spicy take, right? My opinion around coaching is you can't coach someone who doesn't want to be coached. So I recommend any one-on-one you have with an SDR, they should bring their metrics to you. And I'm not talking about activities, right? Like things like making dials, adding people to sequences, writing emails. Those are table stakes. I'm talking about having them come to you with their conversions, specifically things like what is their email reply rate? What is their sentiment on their email replies, right? A lot of people talk about reply rates as being the end-all, be-all of emails, but it's a bit of a false flag, right? Do they accurately track and measure their positive sentiment rate, their objections? How are they handling their objections, right? And then obviously their conversion rates in their phone, their connect rate, their meeting book rate. They should know these things, especially if they're looking for that next level in either SDR management, being an AE, CSM, or whatever.
Armand made a little joke in between number 1 and number 2 around having the audience call me. And I'll be honest, it gave me a little bit of acid reflux when he was like, everyone's going to call Nick. Because I'm like, dude, I do not have time for that. And so I popped a Tums while you were saying number 2 and number 3. But I have to imagine that when you propose doing this headhunting thing with your executive team, they have a similar reaction to the one that I have, which is, Ken, I get it. You want the team calling. You're trying to get them motivated. We're really busy. We don't have time for this. Let's start with, how are you positioning this to your executive team, and how are you selling them on, hey, this is something we're going to do as a company?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a lot less selling than you think, right? Every CEO, every CRO, sales leader understands pipeline is life, right? They understand that the SDR job is the tip of the spear of the go-to-market function, right? And it's innovative, right? A lot of executives are willing to do this, right? And they might say, hey, I might not have enough time for this. You can condense that headhunting drill from a week to a day, right? But every single executive, no matter what they do, has at least 5 minutes in their day to pick up a cold call, especially for someone internally too.
So are you sending a Slack out to all of the execs? Are you like bringing this up in the weekly like exec meeting? How are you communicating it to them? What channel? And then what are some of the talking points you have when you pitch this to them?
So I've done this two ways, right? So the first time I did this, I didn't tell any of the executives. This was back when I was at Outreach. We got a list of all the marketing leaders, all the sales operations leaders, and all the sales leaders. We listed out their cell phone numbers. We attached a point value to them. And then we onboarded a very big class of 12 new SDRs. We set aside a week and we secretly had the SDRs call the executives, right? It was very confusing. I got a lot of interesting Slacks from leaders, right? But I responded to all of them the same way. Hey, I think the best way to train folks is internally, right? That hand-to-hand combat before they go and call executives, other CROs, other VPs of sales live, right? I did get a bit of a slap in the wrist for that one. So moving forward afterwards, what I did was really simple. I sent an email to all the executives outlining, this is happening. This is what we're going to do. Here's the duration. Let me know if you want to opt out. I think getting that gets them to buy in. It gives them space to opt out, obviously, but it makes it part of their natural flow. And we did this like on a regular, like quarterly cadence, both at Outreach and at Vercel.
Folks, what a lot of people don't realize with SDRs is they hear SDRs talking in buzzword or jargon or in things that they just don't even sound like the problems that a prospect has. And the reason for that is, if you look at where an SDR has come from, they've usually come fresh out of school or from a completely different industry, and they don't even get to demo the product or talk to customers. They get to fire off emails and get 99% rejections. And the 1% of people that say yes, they don't even get to go and handle those deals. And so when you give your SDRs the ability to talk to a quote unquote friendly prospect who after the call will tell them, hey, when you called yourself a single source of truth, I had no idea what you meant. Now they can actually start to learn from an industry insider the language of their prospects. So Ken, my question for you is, are there other ways you're using your internal executives? Have you done like fireside chats? How do you teach your SDRs to speak the language of the prospects when they're not the ones who are actually running the sales calls?
We'd have weekly trainings and we'd have different guests within the executive team, right? But the problem with these sessions, like every week, they turn into kind of like mindset or like really high level strategy sessions where maybe a CEO of a technical product is going to talk about new updates that the SDRs frankly don't know and don't care about. So usually what we did was we get revenue leaders, right? The VP of sales, the CRO, a couple sales directors, sales managers come in weekly and do objection handling drills, right? Or let them know about deals progressing that were SDR sourced, the objections coming, right? Very tactical things that they could apply to their day to day.
I remember when I was at Carta, I was running the SDR team there, and Carta sells to CFOs, controllers, accounting people. And so we went through the whole finance team. And for a quarter, we had our CFO come in and do a fireside chat. We had an accountant come in and do a fireside chat. And they would actually show us, here's how we manage Carta's cap table using Carta. And then we would ask them like, okay, tell us about the problems that you actually had. And these SDRs would compare that. We would pull up the language in their emails relative to what the CFO were saying. And they were completely different. And it completely changed the way that we wrote a lot of our emails. So I love what you're talking about with getting execs involved. It also has an ancillary of educating your team on the language of the prospects. Let's talk about the general premise of motivating your team to dial or getting over call reluctance, because I know you have some big strategies around that. Other than this exec dialing piece, how do you get an SDR who's first starting off the job over call reluctance?
So Sam Nelson and I, we coined this pizza pie challenge, right? We've done this with new SDRs, experienced SDRs with Harvard MBAs, right? But it's a really fun thing we do. So essentially, during onboarding, you get SDRs who are fresh from college, to your point, are making a shift, right? And you get them a lead list. And I typically recommend getting small companies. We made the mistake once of selling to local companies, and after a while, we got some angry callbacks, right, about getting sold pizza every month. But essentially, SMBs nearby, every SDR will get about 100 of these companies with cell phone numbers, right? And for an hour on their third day of onboarding, we wouldn't tell them anything about it. We'd hand out the script and tell them, all right, you're going to call as a pizza consultant, as a Domino's or Pizza Hut lover, and try to sell a cheese or pepperoni pizza, right? And everyone would be like, what the hell? Is this a joke? What are you talking about? And fun fact, so we did this like 6 years ago. A pizza back then was like $10. Now, because of inflation, it's about $20, right? But the end result is always the same. We stand up and we tell them, hey, if you can't sell a $10 or $20 pizza, how are you expected to sell a $20,000, $100,000 piece of software, right? And to get the lesson, they start dialing, they start getting connect, and they laugh a little bit. And the best reps would handle these objections very creatively. A lot of people would ask, is this a joke? And they'd handle it like, no, this is not. I'm just a really big pizza aficionado. Or some people would even say, hey, I'm on a diet. Awesome. We've got gluten-free options available, right? And we'd actually deliver pizzas. I got my credit card marked as a fraud once because I delivered so many pizzas online. And the SDRs love this, and they realized, okay, I can do this. It instills that confidence in them, right? And this is primarily for newer SDRs. I've got another thing I do with more tenured SDRs.
I wanted to just ask you something about the newer SDRs. You said you didn't give them a ton of context on this. What basic skills had you gotten down with them? Had you taught them how to open a cold call? Had you taught them any objection handling principles? Were you just giving them a script and saying, hey, you're going to say this word for word? What did you make sure that they knew? And what were you okay with them learning on the fly or on the job?
So the day before, we give them the call script. Yeah, I know script can be a bit of a loader, the call framework that the other SDRs would use, right? And we'd encourage them to spend some time role playing with other people internally, or, in some cases, like memorizing the framework, right? And so the next day, the SDRs would come in having spent a lot of time and probably very anxious to do role plays, right? But before we'd even do role plays internally, we get them into this drill, right? Because the number one problem we see with new SDRs is call reluctance, right? So if you can kill that, you can teach them how to sell complicated ERP software or whatever it is yourself.
Can you talk about the setup of this? Where are you getting the phone numbers? Which prospects? And how do you actually do this?
Definitely. So I've done this two ways, right? The second way is probably more simpler, but I'm going to talk to you about the first way. And it was pretty interesting. So as an outreach, we found a list of disqualified accounts within our CRM that were in the SMB, like less than 100 employees, right? We tagged all of them, and then we created call tasks within outreach and assigned them to the new SDRs, right? And the SDRs got these prospects within these small businesses in Seattle, and they call them every month. The problem from that, and I hope you take away from this, I would probably not recommend doing that, because we did that for several onboarding classes, and we got some complaints from some people saying, hey, like every month I get a call from someone trying to sell me a cheese pizza. Like, I don't like pizza, stop doing this. What I would recommend is getting lead lists from like ZoomInfo, LeadIQ of companies like all over. Again, SMB tier companies, calling like the executive assistant, the CEO, or the owner really of a chiropractic studio or a law practice. Getting those like into an Excel list, printing them out, and having each SDR have approximately 75 to 100. And they want to call them when it's the prospect's lunchtime.
So this is what gets people picking up the phones in the first place. Now that the key to nailing prospecting is to do it every week, do it every day, do it consistently, do it in the morning. Can you talk about the the activity benchmarks that you hold your team accountable to? And B, how do you make sure that those things are consistent?
Activities, those are like table stakes, right? It really depends on the industry, but generally, as a good rule of thumb, an SDR should have a healthy pipeline of anywhere from 300 to 400 people active in sequence, right? Anything below that, it's too little, and they're not adding enough people, aka not prospecting enough daily. Anything more than that, then their targeting is probably off, right? The second thing I'm looking at is the activity of calls. 100 calls a day equals one meeting booked, right? But really, outside of that, I really care about conversions, right? So in my last role at Vercel, I built out the SDR team. I had a couple of SDR managers underneath me, right? I trusted my SDR management team to get the SDRs to their activity benchmarks. But holistically, I'm looking at conversions per rep and per team, right? If they're getting a connect rate below 4 to 5%, that means they're not recycling their numbers in outreach, in sales loft, in Apollo. And this is a really interesting actionable tip. Most major sales engagement providers in the space, they just recycle phone numbers, right? Same with other dialers in the space like Nooks or I'd recommend every month purchase a new phone number in your SCP and then call your cell phone. See if it comes up marked as spam, right? Most of the time it will. And you're going to probably spend 20 to 30 minutes, honestly, buying new phone numbers, deleting them. But once you do that, you're set for about a couple of months, right? And that's probably the best time investment an SDR can make in terms of cold calling.
The phone carriers monitor phone numbers and will flag numbers that are associated with spam or scam dialing or have these crazy volumes of calls. And so it's possible that you purchase a bad number that even though you've never dialed from it before, it will show up for a prospect as spam, scam likely. And obviously, the pickup rates on that are much lower. And so what you're recommending you do is, if you're a sales leader, you should be regularly buying new numbers and testing those numbers to see, is this one of these tainted numbers that I just purchased? My question for you is, if you buy a bad number, are you reaching out to who you bought it from and saying, hey, I need a refund on this? I'm wondering if that's going to get expensive buying a bunch of new numbers all the time.
It does get expensive, but it's really $1 per each cell phone you purchase, right? And then when you look at the ROI of getting a new cell phone number to increase connect rates, to increase meetings, to increase revenue, like the ROI is just plain. It's very clear from there.
Are you managing this for your team, or are you having them manage the purchasing and testing of new numbers?
Every month, I require my team on the first day of the month to purchase 3 new area codes. One for the West Coast, 415, the SF Bay Area, has the highest connect rates we've seen. Second, somewhere in Austin, sometimes Chicago, it really depends, but really anywhere in Central. And then lastly, on the East Coast, either New York or Florida.
What are the pros and cons of using a parallel dialer? And for those who don't know, a parallel dialer, such as Orem, for example, or Nooks is another one, is a software that allows you to basically dial multiple phone numbers at the same time.
Oh, okay. I've got a bit of a spicy take of this, right? So back in my day, and I hate to bring up that old cliche, right? But about 6 years ago, when I was an SDR, I was making 300 dials a day. And my average workday was still like an SDR dial, 8 hours a day, right? And within that 8 hours a day, I was making 300 calls. I was reaching out to 10 to 20 accounts in a personalized way. I wasn't just blasting out phone dials. I think the pros of a dialer, and they're all the rage, it helps with that connect rate issue that a lot of SDRs face, right? One of the cons, though, is that anytime I talk to an SDR leader, we compare KPIs, right? All right, what are your KPIs? How many people do you add to sequence? How many dials? You're like, oh, you use a dialer. Cool. But the number one question SDR leaders have is, what do my reps do all day? Because you got 8 hours in a day, 9 to 5, let's say, right? You got 1 hour of training, internal meetings, all that good stuff, right? So you got 7 hours left to prospect. You can feasibly, without a dialer, make about 100 calls in an hour if no one picks up. If someone picks up with you, maybe it's an hour and a half, right? But with a dialer, you can blast out like hundreds of calls in the space of an hour and get pretty good connect. So what do you do in that 5 hours you have left, right? Oh, you research accounts, right? And that's like this kind of abyss, this black box of researching accounts that SDRs kind of get stuck in. My recommendation is, if you buy a dialer, you've got to increase your KPIs, right? If you don't, your SDRs aren't as productive as they could be.
I want to ask you about that, Ken, because that black box seems very scary. I remember looking at SDR calendars before and some folks they're very regimented. They put their time blocks on their calendar and you think you have a sense of how they're spending that time if they actually follow the blocks. How much guidance are you giving your team on how they should be structuring their day and spending their time? And how accountable are you holding them to your structure to how you think an SDR should run a day versus giving them more flex in terms of what they do, how they do it, etc.?
So flexibility is earned. It's not given, right? I know it's a bit of a spicy take, but SDR, and you're really cutting your teeth. You're getting into sales, right? You can work hard or you can work smart. Ideally, you do both, right? My recommendation for SDRs has always been within the prime calling hours from 10 to 2 generally, right? You should be doing your highest revenue generating activities, aka making phone calls, responding to emails, right? Outside of that, you do things that don't necessarily generate ROI on that same day. Researching accounts, writing emails, all that good stuff, right? But what I encourage SDRs to do, this is a weird take as well too. I'm a big fan of CrossFit, okay? So CrossFit has this concept called workouts of the day, super high intensity, very short, 10 to 15 minute bursts, right? So I'll do competitions with SDRs, either with myself or with my SDR managers. We'll pick an account and within 10 to 15 minutes, they should find at least 3 to 5 prospects to send emails to. If they're not finding those, they're having issues with targeting, right? And if you can improve that ability to find people quickly, you can really have drastic impacts on their pipeline.
Can you talk about if someone is having a hard time finding accounts quickly? How would you coach that?
Yeah, there's a Boolean you can actually implement in LinkedIn Sales Nav that includes titles and previous companies or customers that they came from. But I found the best way to coach that is really to get SDRs to shadow you. So every day, usually in the mornings, 8 to 9, I have an hour carved out to do prospecting shadow sessions. And every single day over the last 6 years, I've made cold calls. I've sent emails. I've prospected, right? And I get my reps to shadow me, right? And at this point, it looks like I have ADHD. I go down all these weird rabbit holes. I pull out all these random things and SDRs ask me, what the hell are you doing? But at the very end, I'm able to pull out 5 stakeholders very quickly, very efficiently, and have a very tactical value prop that I can use to target them. And so they learn through osmosis. We're not in the office anymore, so they can shadow me. And I think that's the best way for them to learn quickly.
Dude, those working sessions are critical for SDRs, especially if you've not worked on a sales floor before. I want you to imagine that first day on the job where all you've used is Microsoft Word, and now you open this weird thing called a CRM. Somehow you need to get all of these people from a CRM into a sales engagement platform to fire off 1,000 emails. And then you need to click this button inside the platform to make the calls. And somehow then the replies get routed. It's so confusing. There's so many tools. And then you got to research information from 17 different places. And you can run as many slide deck trainings as you want. But this is one of those things that you need to do side by side. So easily the most effective thing you can do is I booked it from 4 to 6. And I was like, 4 to 6 is race me to find research accounts as quickly as possible. And people will be shocked when they see someone do it quickly, how fast you can go through this thing. Ken, there's a classic scenario. 2 SDRs, both hitting activity benchmarks. One is not making quota. Where do you start?
That's an interesting question, right? Activities are important, right? But I think conversions are even more important, right? If someone isn't hitting quota, the first thing to look at is, all right, do you have the necessary volume? Right? Most of the times, most SDRs who are missing quota are actually above their KPIs. Right? It's really in conversions where they struggle, right? So I know there's 3 channels, like LinkedIn being that third, but it's not necessarily applicable to all companies. So really, I'm looking at email, I'm looking at calls, right? And then within those 2, I'm looking at, all right, what is your email reply rate holistically over the last 6 months? Right? Over the last couple of years, email reply rates have tanked, but generally having about a 3 to 4% email reply rate is healthy. Okay? Then we click into email reply rate. Now, within email reply rate, what is your sentiment of replies, right? Because if you have a bunch of replies telling you to F off or take me off your list, that's not great, right? We can still work with that, mind you. But we're looking at positive sentiment and objections, right? Objections specifically. Now, here's something really interesting. So most SCPs will classify email replies as positive sentiment or objection sentiment or opt-outs, referrals, etc. Right? It's very hard to increase positive sentiment. A lot of SDR leaders get stuck on, how do I increase my positive sentiment for my SDR from 20% to 25%? Quite frankly, some SDRs are very good at emails and some aren't. Right? Instead, you want to focus on objections. Okay. And within objections, they're going to bucket down into 4 or 5 main buckets. Not interested. There's not much you can do with that. But then there's things like, hey, I don't have budget. It's not the right time. I'm not the right person. And you want to measure how fast your SDRs are taking action on these objection sentiment, right? So if you get 10 replies and 5 of them are objections, the SDR should be calling everyone ASAP, right? Even if they say, take me off your list, I'm not interested. Fun fact, I had an SDR who got one of the meanest replies I've seen, right? Where the prospect took the time out to roast them, right? And I told the SDR, hey, call the prospect. It's very uncomfortable. It's scary. I want you to call them, right? And they asked me why, right? This guy's, he's mean. He's not ever going to take a meeting with us. And I told him this, you have nothing to lose by calling someone who tells you no. In fact, you have everything to gain. If you can turn one of your 100 no's, one into a yes, you get one more yes than you originally would have. How quickly they can action that. And then if your team is calling them or sending emails back, right? Objection sentiment within emails. And then within calls, I think we touched upon this earlier, their meeting book rate on the phone and their connect rate specifically on the phone, right? Meeting book rate, everyone knows. You can do things like role playing with your SDRs daily. That obviously really helps. But connect rate is this. It's something that everyone's accepted as a matter of fact this last couple of years. Connect rates will always be lower. 1%, 2% is normal. It's not. Just change your phone numbers. Recycle them.
Ken, one place that I've also seen really commonly a mistake is targeting. So activity is the same. And I'm like, they're connecting reasonably well. Like their emails are getting opened. And I look at the replies. I'm like, they're sending the same emails. I'm like, why aren't these positive? And I'm like, wait, it's because they're literally reaching out to the wrong ICP. Like it's the wrong type of account or the wrong person. How do you figure that out? Because I always found that one was one that took me hours to get to.
You can go into a prospect active in sequence or in cadence, right? And you can almost view cadences or sequences as an SDR's pipeline, right? And you can see what's real and what's not within that, right? A lot of it, though, does come to enablement, right? Giving new or existing SDRs a very simple, here are the titles, the 10 titles we sell into, here are the 2 verticals we sell into, right? But audit, and it's just a pain in the butt, right? Every month you've got to audit their sequences active.
I wish we had more time, but this is hands down best SDR leadership interview we've ever heard. Ken, we have to move to the final question. There were many good habits of SDR leaders that we discussed here. Now it's time to talk about a bad one. So if there was one bad habit that every SDR leader should break, what would that be?
SDR leaders often complain they don't have enough time, right? They're doing all these internal meetings. And I got this great piece of advice from one of my old VPs. And he said, hey, Ken, do you feel burnt out? Do you feel stressed? I was like, yes, I got so many meetings. I've got meetings with marketing about MQL conversions in our EMEA team of 2 SDRs, XYZ, right? I've got this new product launch coming up here. I've got to build some campaigns around that. Most of the meetings you have are noise. Keep the one thing. And then I realized at the end of the day, any SDR leader, their main job is to coach their SDRs. Most of the time, SDR leaders don't spend enough time coaching reps. They're spending time forecasting, reporting, which is valuable, mind you, but you get so far away removed from that you lack that one main goal of your job, which is to coach your freaking reps. Prospect every day, coach them every single day. It might not benefit you today or tomorrow, but I guarantee in a couple of months' time it will.
Ken, amazing show. Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. All right, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap email. What are your 2?
Number 1, Do the headhunting executive drill where your SDRs call your executives during gaps in their calendar, but give your execs a heads up via an email and explain, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's why we're doing this. And if you don't want to be part of this exercise, you can opt out by replying to this email. Number 2, your SDRs should generally have between 300 and 400 prospects actively in sequence at any given time.
Number 3, the hidden kiss of death is the spam dial. Do your team a favor and have some process to make sure that their numbers are not getting marked as spam. So every time you buy a new number, make sure you test it. And then lastly, number 4, if someone is having slow workflow, do not give them a bunch of slides or Google Doc tutorials. Sit next to them and have them work alongside you in a working session. And I promise their mind will be blown as to how much faster they can research accounts. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
All right, so Ken works really closely with Sam Nelson, and Ken and Sam have put together what is called the Agoge sequence, which is a best practice sequence structure that really your SDRs should probably be using because it's probably better than what they put together themselves or even what your team has put together. They work with a ton of teams and they have best practices around sequence structure. And we worked with Sam and Ken to document the Agoge sequence, and there is a link in the show notes. If you want to go steal it and make it your own, please, we want to see you book more meetings and sell more deals. Go check it out. It's in the show notes. We'll see you next week on the show.